Today's session we'll be focusing more on the basics of SaaS. Before we even get into the multi-tenancy, we'll try to understand some of the basic concepts of SaaS and how it helps a customer or an organization towards addressing some of the challenges that they may encounter. So as part of that, we will start today's agenda would be something like we'll start with the pitfalls in an on-premise model. That way we try to understand the problem first before trying to understand what SaaS helps us to solve. So we'll focus on the problem area and then see how the SaaS solution itself is helping to solve that problem. While doing that, now SaaS itself may also have some challenges, some limitations. We'll try to get some insights into that. And for some people as to why even SaaS, and should it even be thought out as a future, or is it really going to work for everyone? So we'll see some facts around it. And a brief taxonomy overview on the cloud itself. I'm sure you would have heard a lot of terms related to anything related to as a service. So we'll try to get some clarity around what are the various major things out there and what they mean in some layman terms. Then we'll get into the enterprise versus consumer SaaS. How does it vary? What are the parameters that kind of differs between these two types? And we'll also look at from a non-ISV perspective, say in a pure IT of a company, will SaaS be even applicable for them? So we will touch upon that aspect as well, and towards the end we'll look at multi-tenancy itself. Where does it come into this whole picture, and how does it help us to solve some of the challenges within the SaaS itself? So let's start with the problem. As you know, the traditional computing model, which is primarily around on-premise model, an on-premise model typically indicates a situation where the software is getting installed in the premises of the end user organization, right? So an ISV who's producing the software, you typically used to sell it by means of going to the organization's facility, getting a server there, install the software there, implement it as per the needs of the end user organization, and give them the system to their use. That has been the traditional model that has been working at least in the last couple of decades. And it has been working to a good extent until people start encountering some of the challenges. So let's look at the challenges from two different perspectives. One being the customer. The customer here refers to the end user organization, an organization that buys the software and uses it. And then we'll also look at it from an ISV perspective. An ISV is the one who's actually producing and selling the software. So let's look at from both their perspectives what kind of problems they typically encounter in this on-premise model. Starting with the customer perspective. So the first problem being the CapEx, where CapEx indicates a capital expenditure that an organization has to incur in order to procure the software in first place. So typically what happens in on-premise model, the licensing model becomes a perpetual licensing. So you have to buy the entire software, and the organization, once it buys it, owns the software further on. Now in this model, the cost of the software is typically high because it's a one-time selling the ISV does. So they usually try to accommodate all of their cost into it, and hence it becomes a slightly a lump sum amount that the customer has to invest to even procure the software and start using it. Now that being said, there is also an OPEX, which is ongoing operational expenditure. Now this is the expenditure that is related to maintaining the software in the form of, it could be maintenance charges that the ISV applies on the organization, or it could be the kind of servers that they have to keep maintaining, the staff they have to keep to running it. So there is a set of ongoing expenses that the organizations will have to keep further spending on top of the initial expenditure that they are making. No, now there are customers who can afford this kind of a spending, but there are also a large set of customers who probably do not like this idea of spending money on the capex and opex, right? On top of that, there is also the IT expertise need required in an on-premise model. So if you take, for example, a small pharmacy, and the pharmacy is planning to use a system, they are again bound by a limitation that, and they are typically going to be like non-illiterate computer kind of skills people. So they need an additional hand, they need extra expertise to kind of keep it running, or even to ensure that the server is running properly, the software is running properly, and some of the maintenance related activities of the hardware and the software. So not everybody or every organization will be able to afford this IT expertise. And the fourth one is the vendor lock-in. And you might have heard this in several places where an organization goes through a long process of evaluating different softwares, and finally they pick up a software and they start using it. But the moment they start using it, they find that the software is really not helping them out, or the users of the software are not really happy about the software. But in an on-premise model, the situation is you are kind of tied up to the software because you have paid the money and you have bought the software. So whether you like it or not, you have to end up using it, at least for a period, until you feel that money is worth it. So that's what we call as a vendor lock-in, where you are kind of getting married to a particular software, and it's just not going to be easy to come out of it because you already made the investment on it. The last one is from a scalability perspective, and some of the standard mechanisms, licensing mechanisms, works in terms of a number of units or number of users. Say I buy a software for 50 users. Well, actually I may have only 30 users in the organization using it, or I might sometimes probably use 60 users only for a short period of time, but I have to still end up buying a larger license slot. So it's not flexible for me. I cannot scale it or scale down depending on what my needs are. I still have to go by the terms fixed by the ISV provider. So I just have to comply with it. The flexibility is missing. So these are some of the challenges from a customer perspective. And let's look at from an ISV perspective what they feel are the challenges in the on-premise model. The first one being the biggest challenge of it, the long sales cycle. As I was mentioning there, the customers, since they are going to lock themselves down to the software and they are going to be relying on this further on, they typically start taking a long time to make the decision. And the typical, the stats provided by some of the surveys state that the typical sales cycle of an ISV can be as long as 12 to 18 months. And that's like 1.5 years an ISV will have to keep chasing down an organization before they even come to know whether they are buying it or not. On top of that, the success percentage and the churn out of the customers is going to add more trouble to it. So a long sales cycle means that the ISVs are spending more money in terms of assisting the customer throughout that sales cycle period, which means their salespersons have to be paid during that period. So it's a lot of additional expenses that comes in from an ISV perspective. The implementation time is another factor where the typical model itself, the customer wants it like tailor-made for them. So while they kind of buy the software, they ask the ISVs to customize it, to fine-tune it, to exactly meet all the corners of what the organization is looking for. So this scenario leads to a situation where the ISVs will have to modify, customize, and change a lot of things as per the organization's need, and hence it takes quite amount of time for implementation. And the survey again states that it's anywhere between around 6 months of time that one typically spends in implementing the software. Obviously, given the size of the software, it's going to vary, but on an average, it's as much as like around 6 months, which is again additional cost for the ISV. And we have to remember that all these additional costs are going to be converted and sent back to the organization, which means the organizations will have to keep paying more to procure these softwares, and hence leading to the first point of CAPEX issue. And the third one is the rigid licensing model. As we talked about the scalability issue, from an ISV perspective, they don't afford or they don't have the flexibility within the product or in their framework to allow the user or to allow the organization to kind of pick and choose different licensing models. So it's pretty much one flat licensing model, either like number of users you buy it or number of units you operate using the software. So the ISVs don't offer like a wide variety of ways in which you can actually pay or use the software. So they are kind of pretty rigid on that front. And there is also this huge SMB market out there which is untapped because of the capex issue. And SMB here represents the small and medium businesses. And as we talked about, the capex itself is a huge cost which not every customer, every organization will be able to afford, particularly the SMB ones. So the small and medium business, while they are interested to use the software and they know that it's going to help them, but because of this huge cost upfront, they are kind of putting themselves staying away from this software, which is a loss for the ISV in some senses, because there is a market, there are people interested to use the software, but because of the current way it is being sold, the SMBs are not interested to buy it and use it. And the last one is the updates, which is a big nightmare for any ISV who is operating on on-premise model, because as we know, once the software copies are distributed and say you have 50 customers out there, it's going to be in a big challenge to maintain all those versions of the software, because customers are going to keep coming back with issues, with small enhancements, and not every customer will be willing to keep upgrading their product. So even if you upgrade your product from say 3.0 to 4.0, not every customer is going to be willing to or will be interested in moving from 3 to 4. So what you end up is, you end up supporting multiple versions of the product, and again leading to maintenance issues, maintenance cost, operational cost, and all of that again converting back to your capex. So it's a kind of a cyclic issue that we can see here from a customer and ISV perspective. So let's see how this can be transformed, and this is a pictorial representation of how the on-premise model itself works. And if I had to compare it from a standard model, the internet here is unused, is untapped, whereas the LAN of the end user organization is where the software and the infrastructure is available. So you set up the server, you load the software, and you access it all happening within the premises of the end user organization. Let's look at how this transforms in a SaaS model. So in a SaaS model, as we see, the software portion is moved out of the LAN and it's available somewhere outside, and it's been accessed through the internet by the users present in the organization. So this is a very basic difference between the on-premise and the SaaS model. The primary three things that differentiates it: one, the SaaS model allows the ownership of the application to be with the SaaS provider, which is in this case the ISV itself. So in the SaaS model, the organizations are not going to buy the software, rather they are going to buy the service of using the software, which is a fundamental difference, right? So I'm just, in simple terms, I'm just renting a car instead of buying a car. That's a lot of difference for me, right? So I can rent it whenever I want, I can use it for how long I want it to, and then once I'm done, I'm going to just maybe get out of it. So there's no commitment, no lock-in. So that's a fundamental difference in a SaaS model. And the second key difference is it's delivered and managed remotely by the SaaS provider. So it's available somewhere in a central place where I can access it anytime, anywhere I want to, and it's typically accessed over the internet medium. And the last point is again tied back to the usage. So since you are not buying the software, what you do is in fact pay for what you are using or what you are consuming. So it's what we call is a subscription model. That's exactly the term it's used to refer. So there are multiple ways in which the software can be billed. So it can be based on your usage, it can be based on the amount of transactions you do on the software. Now this whole paradigm shift opens up a lot of provisions in which ISVs can come with innovative ideas to bill, to charge their customers, and customers will also have a wide variety of choices for them to pick up. So these three things are the fundamental definition of what qualifies a basic SaaS model. So let's see how does it work compared to what we saw. So let's take a provider who is the ISV itself, and let's see how the SaaS model addresses the pitfalls or the challenges we saw in the initial slide. So the first thing is this model, as we saw, it's going to provide a flexible subscription model. So the provider now can open up different ways in which people can use it and pay for it. So it gives that flexibility for the provider. And centralized updates. Since the software is loaded in a central place and been allowed to be used by the end users, the control is within the provider. Now that makes a lot of difference. So the provider can do updates in a centralized fashion. Instead of running behind 50 customers, they can just update it in one single place, which makes a lot of difference from an operational and maintenance perspective. And the pay-per-usage model itself brings the low-cost model option, which means they can go against the untapped SMB market. So the SMBs now will be more interested because you are not asking a lump sum money from them, but instead you are asking money for what they want the product to be used for. That's a very attractive deal, and hence a lot more SMBs will be coming forward towards choosing the SaaS model. And with this model, again, a quicker rollout is going to be possible, which means you can keep releasing newer versions of the software more often compared to an on-premise model where you typically release once in a year or maximum twice in a year. Instead, in a SaaS, it's as much as every month or every couple of months you can keep upgrading your version, and you can keep releasing new features in a much more shorter time frame, which means you are going to have more happy customers using the software. So from a provider perspective, we saw a few things getting addressed. Likewise, on the consumer perspective, as we saw, there is no infrastructure requirements for them because it's not going to be inside their premises, and they need not even worry about the infrastructure, which means that there is a reduced capex as well. You don't have to buy a server just for the sake of loading the software. All you need is a basic, simple machine with the internet access is required to access the software. And the subscription and usage-based payment is going to be attractive for them because they are just going to be picking up the choice that will work best for them. And the application infrastructure is being maintained by the provider, which means there are no operational expenditures anymore for the organization. It's going to be the headache of the provider to ensure that the application is maintained properly, the servers are maintained properly, the standard checks of the hardware is taken care. So the consumer is totally out of those headaches, and all you have to do is just use the software. And the primary difference being the purchase is now not the software itself, but the service that the provider offers to them. And from an internal IT expertise, there is no more need for the organization to have an internal IT expertise because they are just not going to maintain those infrastructures anymore within their premises. So we saw how it's going to transform or how it's going to help address some of those pitfalls from both the ends, from an ISV and a consumer perspective. So it's a kind of a win-win situation for both of them, where the ISVs are also benefiting as well as the consumers are also benefiting. Now, having said that, let's also understand SaaS has impact on different areas within a company. So many think that SaaS is just a technology change, which is not the case. Rather, it's a bigger change than that, where there are three areas that typically gets affected from an ISV perspective, or whoever is planning to roll out the SaaS model. So one, it starts with the business model itself, where the business model indicates how do I even price the software now? So far I've been selling it for lump sum, but now I'm going to charge it every month. So what is the right number? What is the right pricing I should charge? Because I should not overcharge because I will lose customers. Maybe my competitor will probably give it for a lower price. So how am I going to price this whole thing? So there are things that you have to think through about from pricing perspective. How am I going to do the sales itself? And in some cases, for example, the sales compensation itself. If I have a sales team, how am I going to reward them for customers? Earlier, it's very simple. You get a lump sum and you give a percentage of commission, then your job is done. So the salespeople are also happy because they know exactly what their cut is going to be. But in a SaaS model, the revenues are going to be tripping. It's going to be coming in bits and pieces, month on month, quarter on quarter. So the compensation for a salesperson is not going to be as attractive as it used to be in case of an on-premise model. So you need to work out a different strategy, motivate your salespeople, and also kind of change their mindset towards selling a service rather than selling a software. So these are some of the challenges involved from a business perspective that one has to handle or transition into. The other aspect is the architecture itself, which is the pure technical challenges that you have to solve in order to enable your product or software to work in a SaaS model. And the third one is purely from an operational perspective. So the whole SaaS model revolves around SLAs, which stands for service level agreements. So the customer, the organization is going to buy service from you, which means you need to be sure that you are complying with the service agreements that you are giving to them. For example, availability of the software. Since the software is going to be sitting outside somewhere, customers are always going to have concern that is my software going to be available all the time? What happens if the application is down, and what happens if I have a very critical business need and the application is not available? So there are a set of operational challenges you have to take care, support the response of the support team itself, how quickly you can address issues posted by customer. So there are a set of operational challenges as well that you will have to address in the SaaS model. Now, having seen the benefits and some of the highlights of it, there are still going to be some challenges around the SaaS model. Some of them being one, the change in cash flow. So as we saw, what used to be the case earlier, where you get lump sum of monies and hence it's pretty easy for you to manage the cash flow. Rather now it's going to be coming in terms of drips. Now this chart will kind of give you an idea of how a typical revenue flow could be in a SaaS model. So as you can see, the revenue versus time chart, initially you may not even get any money out of it because you may give a pilot, a free pilot or a free trial for the customers. And once they are happy with the product and once they start buying, there is a possibility that the customer may not buy everything in one shot. So you may have 10 modules. Most likely SMBs, what they do is they pick and choose the modules that are important for them. So they may pick modules, say 1, 3 and 5, and the rest of the modules are not of interest. So they pay only for those modules that they have chosen. But over a period of time, as they start using this software, as they get more used to it, they may slowly start expanding their usage, which means they are going to add more modules into their license, which means that the revenues that you are going to get from a customer, a typical customer, could always start as a small amount, and then it can keep increasing over a period of time. But once you have still reached the complete stage, there is a possibility that the customers may churn. The customers may pick and choose at any point in time. You don't know what the customers may prefer. So you should always plan for the fluctuations in your cash flow because of the churn that is possible in the SaaS model. So that's one big challenge from an operational perspective, from a way you manage your business purely for an ISV. And you need to be highly responsive to the customer, market, and competition. So as I mentioned, you should be able to quickly turn around things. You should be able to show new features coming into your product. You need to keep your customers interested all the time. It's not like you have sold the software and you're done. Rather, you have to ensure that the customer satisfaction is all the time available, and they are kind of happy with the software they want to use. And other key is building the long tail. So as we saw, the SMB market is huge market, and as we see in this graph, so far you used to get a revenue per customer which is very high. It is just because of the lump sum you get from them. So in one shot you get the lump sum, but the number of people you can address, the addressable market for that kind of a customer is typically the large customers, which means the area that you may address, the market is very thin compared to the SMB market, which is a huge market, and that's the one we will be targeting again. So this new market, what you see here, the goal for a ISV should be to have as long a tail as possible, so that your number of customer base is more, which means you are going to get better revenues. Better revenues means you will be able to run the SaaS business in a much more profitable and more stable way. So forming the long tail is one of the challenges, and having a scalable architecture. And this is one of the things we see time and again. Due to several factors and several pressures, sometimes people take shortcuts and they get into the SaaS model, but once they reach a certain threshold of customers, the system starts choking, or it's not in a position to support anymore. So you kind of end up in a stranded thing. You cannot, well, there are customers out there, you are not able to bring them on board because your software is just not capable of able to accept more load. So which means a scalable architecture is a backbone of a successful SaaS business, and that's something that is a challenge for them, because you may already have a software in place, so you have to convert this software into an architecture which can support this kind of scalability expected in the SaaS model. And optimized use of support bandwidth again points back to how efficiently you are operating your teams, your support teams and your other professional services teams, because the revenues are going to be pretty low. You are going to be tight in your cash flow, so you really need to have a strategy in place to be able to optimally use them in a way that you use them only on a definitely needed basis. And the next point, self-serving system is related to that, where your goal should be to have the users of the system or the organization itself to be able to serve as much as they can independently without even the need for approaching a support team member. So to that extent, you may want to give more FAQs, more online help manuals, make the system more intuitive, so that they can figure it out themselves rather than keeping hitting the support team. So if you keep hitting the support team, what happens? The support team starts choking at a certain point in time, which means you have to keep increasing the support team, which means that the cost and the expenditure is going to go up out of the roof. So these are some of the challenges, but these are all addressable challenges, but it's just that one should be aware about the challenges and should be planning for that. So let's look at some of the expectations from a customer perspective and from an ISV perspective in terms of what they expect from a SaaS model, right? So let's take from a customer side, what do I expect? So if I am an organization planning to buy a SaaS product, right? I'm going to start using one of the SaaS products out there. Now what do I expect from that vendor, right? The first key point being the security itself. Now as we saw, the software is sitting outside, which means my data is also going to be sitting outside. Now how comfortable I am with that? So how do I know that if my data is secure there? And how do I know nobody else takes a look at the data? And how do I know the whole system itself in a secure place? So the customer is always going to be interested in terms of ensuring the security aspects are taken care of. The second one being the enhancements. So how frequently can I get more updates on your software? Because all the competitors are going to be providing newer features, newer enhancements. So the other point the customers will start expecting is how soon enhancements can be coming. Are you going to release every month or every 2 months, or it's going to be once in a quarter? The roadmap of the product itself. The third being customization. While the SaaS model itself, because the SaaS model works pretty much mostly like an out-of-box solution, but still customers will want to do certain level of customizations. It could be the basic level of customizations. They don't want the software or the feature to be dramatically changed. but rather they want it to be customized to a certain extent where it kind of meets their basic needs of using the software. So what kind of facilities are offered in the product to be able to customize it to what I need? And the fourth one being the availability itself. And as we talked, availability is going to be one of the key factors, and that is going to be the primary question as to how can you guarantee the availability of this application out there. So that's something that the customer is going to always ask for. And many times people don't think about the termination, which is equally important. So the customers will be interested to know, what if I decide to move away in between? What if after 6 months I feel the software is not working out? So what kind of a terminational terms you have in place? How can I get my data back? And how easy is it to get the data back even? And is the data in a proper way that I can interpret and start using it using some other system? So those are some of the questions they may have regarding termination. Integration, one of the other key challenges. In many cases, customers have in-house systems in place, which are already built or homegrown, or they could already have brought it. Many times they want this new software to be able to integrate with the existing other systems and be able to work in a synchronized fashion. So the questions could be around what kind of integration support is being provided, what kind of a framework or API or what kind of options are there for me to have this integration done. The last one being the support itself. How good is your support? So if I have issues, who's going to address me? How soon can it be addressed? And who's going to take care of it? Right. So we call it abbreviated as SICATIS. So these are the things that the customers are going to be expecting from a SaaS provider, from a SaaS solution. And the other aspect is from an engineering perspective, the ISV in themselves, what do they expect from this? What all they have to address for becoming or converting themselves to the SaaS model? So the first one is from a scalability perspective. So they really need to have a much better scalable solution compared to an on-premise model, because your idea of on-premise is always confined to one organization and a set of users within that organization. Whereas in a SaaS model, we are talking about a group of organizations and each organization having a group of users. So we are talking about a big X factor there, which your system should be capable of supporting. And the configurability and extendability capabilities within the product. Configurability, for example, allows or gives the capability to the end user to be able to configure the product. Like we saw, the customization option there itself can be achieved by the configurability provided by the software. And the same is the case with extendability. So how extendable it is. So if I have a form and if I want to add just a couple more fields, how easy it is to do it. So should I need to pay for it? Should I need to wait for 2 months? So questions around that can be answered if you have a good amount of extendability in the product. Administration capabilities, where for example you have to manage all your tenants. How easy it is to manage the tenants, and say if you have, by tenants we mean here the organizations who are using the software. So you need to keep track of who are those organizations and what modules they have purchased, which module they purchased from when, and how should I even build them, from what date I should build them for which module. So there is a lot of information that you will have to keep working out. So how is your administration capability of the software helping you to do all this in a easy way? That way you don't spend up a lot of time and bandwidth on administering the whole thing. And finally, multi-tenancy, the question of multi-tenancy itself coming in. Should my product be a multi-tenant one? So that's a bigger question, and the entire series is around multi-tenancy itself. So we'll get into the details of it a bit later. But from an engineering perspective, these are some of the areas that one will have to think through or analyze towards moving to the SaaS model. A quick check on the facts itself. As we saw, will SaaS really work? And there could be questions around, is it going to be a success or is it going to be a failure? To be honest, the answer is still not known because we still have to wait. But the trend and the facts that are being published by different sources definitely show a very positive sign towards the adoption of SaaS. because of the primary reason, as I mentioned, it's a win-win situation for both the consumer, the user, as well as the software producer. So that could be one reason why we can expect it to be successful in the coming future as well. So this is some of the stats that you can just read it out. And the primary thing is the SaaS itself changes the game of procurement. So the bottom is a very small case study of MasterCard, where MasterCard, they decided to use a third-party SaaS as a HR solution. Now, MasterCard, for what we know, is a very large organization, and they can easily afford to buy a product and install it within their premises. They can buy the best of the product out there, but they still decided to do this because of multiple reasons. One being the lower TCO, the total cost of ownership, and also the flexibility the SaaS model provides to the department. In this case, the HR department of MasterCard was able to make the decision by themselves, which otherwise would have taken probably a long time to get past that budget approval from their top management. Here, since it's becoming a kind of a month-to-month expense, the HR department can very well decide to spend that money as part of their own monthly budget that they get allocated to. So it kind of changes the game how the software is being procured and used, and how people view software procurement itself in the first place. Fine. So with that, we will get into some of the terminologies that are out there in the market, and I'm sure you would have heard plenty of terms out there, abbreviations, all permutation and combinations. So let's understand it from a very simple perspective of how these terms map up with what is there on the ground. So a typical solution stack, let's start from there. As we all know, you have the basic hardware, which is the fundamental thing. You need a hardware to run the application itself, right? The software itself. Now that is the fundamental thing. So hardware is just a box, a machine, a server, and all it provides is just a place where the application can run. The other layer is the framework itself. Now the framework is something that addresses the basic plumbing layers, the basic components, for example, the authentication, logging, security, so all those basic things which are not the functionality of the product itself, rather it's the base in which the functionality is being developed on. So there are a set of things what we typically call the framework brings in to the table, and the top layer becomes the application. So the application consumes this framework and it's been built on top of the framework and is deployed in the hardware, and that's how the whole solution is available for one to use. So let's see how this gets transformed in what we are expecting from today's SaaS world. And before that, a quick check on the needs on each of these levels. So if you look at from a hardware perspective, what is required? What do I need? So I need like network architects who can take care of setting up the hardware, the configuration, security related aspects. And if I have hosting related things, then I need them to take care of that. So those are the typical needs I have at the hardware level. And at the framework level, I need a software architect who can build me a solid framework, a framework that I can rely on, which is tested, proven, solid, and I can just start building my application on top of it. So that's the need I have at the framework level. At an application level, all I need is developers who can write a code as fast as they can, so that I can get more features out as soon as possible and start getting more money out of it. So this is the needs that I have on each of these areas. And let's look at how these needs are getting addressed in today's cloud. So the transformation, as you can see, starting from the hardware piece is completely replaced in what we call today as IaaS, stands for Infrastructure as a Service. Now, the Infrastructure as a Service is a vendor who provides this hardware piece alone as a service. So which means I can just use the hardware provided by some other person. I don't even have to buy it. I just have to just use it and pay for what I'm using. And comparatively, at a framework level, there are PaaS providers who provide the framework. So if all I'm looking for is a framework, I can go to a PaaS provider, use their framework, and start building the application on top of it. And at an application level is where the final application that I'm building is going to be sitting. So some of the vendors you might have heard are the Amazon, EZ2, Azure, Rackspace. These are the players in the IaaS segment. And Force.com, Google App, Longjump, these are some of the players at the PaaS layer. And the application itself, the final application working on the SaaS is going to be the SaaS solution. So this is to just get a basic idea in terms of the SaaS, PaaS, and IaaS, right? So end of the day, finally, what you are going to take to your customers, end customers, if you are a ISV, is the SaaS solution itself. Now, the customers may not even be aware about the PaaS and IaaS behind it. All they will be seeing is the solution that you are offering them. Right? So it's the internals of the solution that's going to be a decision of whether you are going to use a PaaS or IaaS or some other options. So trying to segregate further the SaaS itself, there are two categories or two types of SaaS or solutions that one can build. And many times people tend to confuse between these two types of solutions. So one is called the consumer SaaS and the other one is called the enterprise SaaS. Now, there are some parameters which will help us to give a very clear demarcation between these two types. Starting with the end user, which is a primary thing here. For a consumer kind of case, it's going to be typically the general public, the general audience, individuals who will be using this solution. Examples that is, as you can see from the last row, Google Apps or Facebook. Now Facebook is typically used by a user, right? So they just go there, be interested with it, they start using it, and the whole revenue of it is just through by the word by mouth and the trends that people see. So Facebook, as you all know, it just got popular just because people liked it. There is no separate marketing campaign or anything like that for it. Compared to an enterprise case where the reason the people who are going to buy enterprise SaaS are going to be organizations, and the reason why they are buying is to solve a business problem. The software they are going to buy is going to provide a solution to one of their business problems, and hence they are interested to buy it. And the typical way they go about doing it is through floating some tenders or proposals or marketing. Those are the mechanisms through which they typically kind of go ahead and get it. And the support, if you look at again from a consumer SaaS, it's like pretty public. So there isn't any professional help desk like the case of enterprise. You don't have, like, you have a problem in Facebook. It's not like you can call up a service desk and check out with them what the problem is, right? So it's primarily driven by community discussions, forums, blogs, and those kind of aspects. Whereas enterprise, it's done more professionally. So you have a help desk, you have a support team in place. And training, likewise, you have professional training services available within for an enterprise SaaS. Whereas it's going to be just again through the forums and blogs and things of that nature. The integration and customizations, there will not be too much options there in consumer. Probably they will do whatever is bare minimum required and what is more commonly needed. Whereas here it could be specific integration needs. There is consultation services, and you can also go for specific third-party integrators out there. And some of the sales examples could be the Salesforce.com for enterprise. So I have a need for customer management, so I go to Salesforce.com and then I buy it and then I start using it, right? Compared to, like I said, Facebook, I'm just curious to use it. I'm just interested. I just go and start using it. So the whole thing is driven in a different way. And one thing we need to notice is the way you operate and build and operate these two versions are totally different. And as you can imagine, for a consumer SaaS, you can just expect the amount of load it can expect. Just as an example, so we know Facebook. You know how many people are using Facebook at a concurrent time, and which cannot be compared to an enterprise case at all. In enterprise, it's going to be certain number of users, which you know for sure. But whereas in a consumer SaaS, it's going to be extremely high, which means you have to design, architect the solution in a slightly different way than what you would have done for an enterprise. And your entire thought process of scalability, load, will all be at a different level for designing the solution in compared to the consumer and the enterprise. So just have that differentiation clear between these two versions. And looking at a similar thing from an enterprise and consumer, that's one variation of SaaS solutions out there. But totally taking it off to a case where let's look at a normal enterprise, a company which is probably into some servicing business. Now they could have a need to have systems for their own operational reasons, right? So it's very common today to have an IT team and IT team responsible to produce these applications, produce these software which can help the company, help the users of the company to be able to do their job in a much more effective way. So there are an increasing number of trends we see where some of these SaaS aspects are kind of getting needed, or the need of having similar kind of solutions is also building up in a case of IT solutions. So the whole thing we are talking about here is from an analogy perspective. Some of the SaaS analogy things are still applied or applicable to an internal IT of a company. Now the primary difference, as you can see, the application is still probably is developed by the company itself, right? By the IT team of the company, which means they own that software and they could deliver it and manage it from a central place. So let's take an example of GE, for example. It's a slightly large company and they have different people who may need different solutions. So the IT team of it is in a position to build software but make it available in one single place. That way everybody can use it. That way the users of the software do not worry about where it is coming from or worry about the infrastructure, worry about anything else. So all they need is just use it, which is pretty much an analogy of what we saw earlier in a SaaS case where the customers need not worry about anything rather than just using the software. So that's the first point from an internal IT perspective. And the second one is, as we see, there are several groups in a large organization. Now there is very much a possibility that you want certain groups to access certain information, right? So you don't want, for example, anybody to go and look at the salary of anybody, right? So whereas only a HR team, a HR department person can look at sensitive information like salary. Now this very need of it brings in a situation which is very similar to SaaS, where you want varying levels of controls by group, which means you should be able to organize your users into multiple groups, have different levels of permissions and associate certain permissions to certain groups and be able to manage this whole thing. So the analogy of it is pretty much close to the SaaS model, and sometimes it may also lead to, at a data storage level, you may want data isolation between the different groups. For example, you have multiple branches and one branch data should not be seen by another branch at all at no point in time, which means there has to be a data isolation coming into picture, which is again similar to SaaS model. You don't want one customer's data to be viewed by another customer. That's going to be jeopardizing the whole thing. So the idea is that many of these analogies that are there in the SaaS is also applicable to an internal IT setup, and the trend is that a lot of people have started following the same solutions, the same kind of problems. So they're tending to follow the same solutions to solve those problems. This picture will give you a kind of example of that, the GE case itself, like we saw. So as you can see, there are different groups, say GE US, there is GE UK and GE Asia, and each one being an entity by itself. But however, GE as a company may decide to have a CRM application available out there in a central place and accessed over internet. So as you can see, GE US can access a CRM application, whereas the UK also can access CRM application. And on top of it, there is also a possibility that GE's customer may also log into the CRM application and be able to view their information. So if you look at the permissions, privileges of what a GE customer can do will be different from what GE US can do. And the same is the case with possible between GE US and UK. GE US may use certain features of the CRM application, whereas GE UK may not use it. So the analogy of it, pretty much you need the same level of control, similar level of security level implementations required at an internal IT solution perspective as well. So moving on, let's look at from an a solution what many of the ISVs tend to take, what is called the single instance model, or sometime back it had a different name of application service provider, but that term is pretty much obsolete. So we'll use the term single instance model. So in this model, what happens, as you can see, the software provider, right, the ISV, uses a data center or a hosting provider where they host different instances of their product. So as you can see, there is instance A which is hosted there, and the instance A itself have its own server, its own OS, its own framework, and the application is also within it, right? And this whole setup is made available for just one customer, and say that customer is customer A. Now, as you could imagine, this is a very easy way to get into a SaaS model, right? Because you still meet the criteria by offering the product or application from a central place, and you can still charge the customer on a periodic basis, say every month or every quarterly. And the customer, all they need to do is access the application over an internet, and they need not be worried about the infrastructure or anything else. So the kind of SaaS definition is met here, but in a very crude way, right? So it's a very easy shortcut to move to SaaS model, and many ISVs tend to move to this because it's easy, less of investment as well. But having said that, this may not sustain for a long time, right? Because of the very fact of maintaining multiple copies of your software. So this picture looks probably pretty because there are only 3 customers. Now I cannot imagine how this would be if it's 50 customers. So you can imagine the amount of complexity it's going to bring in terms of maintaining such a model, and as you can imagine, it's not scalable as well. So I need to have a lot more, I need to spend a lot more on the maintenance and the operations per se in terms of managing this model. So end of the day, I don't get anything better. In fact, I might be spending more than what I might be getting from the customers. And because of the scalability issues, there could be customer dissatisfaction. You may not be able to scale up. You can think of a simple scenario where you have to say fix an issue and release it. So this case, you will have to fix it and then release it 50 times if you have 50 instances. So you can think about the amount of time it's going to take, the amount of manpower it's going to take. So the whole thing may not even justify from an operation perspective. So maintenance is going to be an hectic nightmare in this model, and then leading to a high operational cost. So this model is typically called the single instance model. While it works, and many ISVs maybe use it, maybe for an experimental per se also they may use it. They just want to see how SaaS model works for me. They may not even fully decided to go in it, but they just want to try it, which is fine. But one should also be aware about the downside of it, and be ready to have a plan in place to solve it. And the way it can be solved pretty much is moving into what our topic of the day, and the whole thing revolving around the multi-tenancy itself. So multi-tenancy is coming into picture pretty much to address what the single instance uh, is not able to address, right? So how do I bring in optimized way of managing, deploying the software and managing it? How do I get rid of 50 copies and instead just maintain one copy and serve 50 customers? Now that's an attractive way of doing business, and operation wise it's attractive. So that even if there is issues or fixes, I do it in one copy of the software and then it gets reflected for all the 50 customers. So it becomes extremely valuable for me, extremely cost saving for me, particularly when I grow, when I scale up to more customers. So even if I reach 200 or 300 customers, all I'm going to keep doing is manage one version of the software, manage one copy of it and do it properly, right? So it allows you to operate at an extreme high level of optimized way of doing things, which indirectly means that you are going to spend less, which means that you can be better, you can be in a better position to manage your SaaS business, and your cash flows can be managed in a more efficient manner. And as we saw, the model itself allows you a very, very high level of scalability, which means that, as I said, you can keep adding more customers, and if at all you reach even a threshold, you can still spawn out in another version, maybe in another version which can take another 300 customers. So you still end up only maintaining 2 copies instead of 600 copies. So it's an extremely solid way of going forward, particularly as a long-term solution. If one is looking towards moving in the SaaS model, multi-tenancy becomes the inevitable one for someone to encounter and be able to work on it. So that's where we will complete today's session. So moving forward, the next sessions we will be talking more in terms of what is multi-tenancy itself and what kind of benefits it brings into the table, and how can you actually implement the multi-tenancy itself. So those are the things we will be discussing in the forthcoming sessions. So this session, as we saw, is primarily to ensure that we have the basics in place and everybody is on the same page with respect to the terminologies and what SaaS can do, cannot do, and some of the challenges inherent within the SaaS model itself, the varieties of SaaS involved, enterprise versus consumer, and also the SaaS analogy that could also be applied for an internal IT of a company, which has got nothing to do with SaaS, but still the problems are similar and hence the solutions can also be similar there. And we also looked at the single instance model and how it may temporarily solve the needs of SaaS, but on a long-term solution, multi-tenancy is always going to be the route one should take to lead to a much more scalable solution. So with that, we will come to the end of this particular session, and you can feel free to post the questions that you may have, and we'll take the next few minutes to address these questions. Okay, so we have started getting the questions. So the first one is the question around the single instance model we saw. So the question is around whether the single instance model is same as what you can call as a single tenant. Well, in terms of tenant terms, you can say that. So as we can see in this picture, each of these instances serves one customer. Customer in this SaaS terminology is a tenant. So each tenant has been served by one instance. So you can always say it as, you can also call it as a single tenant model. Okay, we have another question here. The question is, what is the difference in cloud hosting cost with or without multi-tenancy for a given number of customers? So as we saw in the earlier model, when you don't have a multi-tenant solution, you end up using more servers. So the very fact that you are going to be using more servers means that you are going to be paying more for the servers as well as the hosting services that are going to be attached with the servers. So instead of say one server, I'm going to end up taking 50 servers from Amazon or any of the hardware providers. So my cost of hosting is also going to be numerous times. Now, having said that, there are technologies out there like virtualization and things like that, but end of the day, it's not going to be as beneficial as a multi-tenant system, because as I said, in the multi-tenant system, you have one copy of your software, and all you need is one good configuration of a server class, which can serve a lot of customers. So yes, so obviously there is going to be a difference in terms of having or hosting a non-multi-tenant system versus a multi-tenant system, where the multi-tenant system is going to be much more a cost-saving one purely from a hosting perspective.